Week 8 of college football is here. This is Stupid versus the Spread. I am Alex. That's Mike. We're going to talk college football Week 7 recap, and we're going to talk about the upcoming games for Week 8. Not the best matchups, I don't think, Michael, but still some gems hidden in there, some good lines, some good games coming up. Let's start with the biggest storyline of the week as we record here. Tennessee beat Alabama at home, first time in 15 years, was it? 20
Yeah,
years?
17 or 20 years, something like that.
You saw Tennessee go nuts. I mean, it was a fantastic game if you didn't see it. Tennessee went up early. Bama came back like you think they do. And then in a crazy last minute, Bama misses a field goal. Tennessee drives down within, 10, 15 seconds and kicks a
Yep.
game-winning field goal to win the game. My biggest takeaway, I think, is that Alabama seems, I don't want to say off, but for the skill positions they haven't been playing to their talent potential. And I was also really impressed with Tennessee. So I think the to describe how this plays out, right? So Alabama still has if they win out, a more or less guaranteed slot in the SEC championship game. So Tennessee will have to beat Georgia as they're in the Eastern Conference to make it that far, and then they'd probably get a rematch with Bama, ironically. But right now, Tennessee is looking good. Their biggest game coming up probably the next 2-3 weeks as they play Georgia, to then go ahead to the SEC championship and maybe even a shot at the national title in the tournament. What impressed you the most, Mike?
Um, I think I think what impressed me the most was a negative in that Bama couldn't get the stop that they always get.
Hmm.
And that may be a problem. And it's weird because there's like no issue with the talent like on that defense. They
Right.
haven't had any injuries. You know, they're not even young at corner or safety or key, middle linebacker, key positions where you would say, okay, that's the weakness. They have two, maybe the two best pass rushers in the country in Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. Um, so I don't know why they're bad, but they haven't been good. I mean, giving up the amount of points they did to Texas A&M to even keep that game close, and then to give up 50 on the road, which Alabama just never does.
Yeah.
Is it's not even so much like do you hit the panic button? It's just more how is this happening with all the talent on the field? I know McKinstry had a pick, but it just doesn't make any sense. Good for Tennessee. What a win! What a win for their fan base. I mean, obviously they dragged the goalposts out, threw them in the river. I saw a message board post from Alabama saying that that was on purpose because the field goal posts were actually not uh,
Of regulation
not
size,
the regulation size, and
as if they don't
it
measure
was
them
a
every
huge
game.
conspiracy.
Uh,
Um,
love college football
Incredible,
fans.
yeah,
I
incredible. But Paul, but no, what a win for Tennessee. I think more, you know, it's shocking to see Bama lose a game like that. Now you basically go to out of the three teams we just mentioned, or you mentioned, Bama, Tennessee, and Georgia. Who ends up with two losses is out. I mean, this is just knockout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, unless somebody stumbles along the way, but if Tennessee if if Tennessee only has one loss, that's where this gets interesting. But if Tennessee loses to if Tennessee beats Georgia, well, I guess sorry, yeah, no, this is interesting in the East, for
Yeah.
whoever doesn't make the SEC championship game.
Because you could argue that Tennessee would have an equally impressive, series of games if you're looking at national title talk, right? If they only lose to Georgia, having beat
Yeah,
Alabama, Florida, LSU, Pitt,
I
and
think
then presumably Kentucky, Missouri, and South Carolina.
yeah, I think out of the East, whoever loses that Tennessee Georgia game is probably out, not because they deserve to be, but because I just don't see the committee putting three SEC teams in the playoff. I just
Well, so I will say this, and I don't want to. Obviously, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But if it is Georgia, Bama, and Georgia wins, Like Bama's a 2-loss team. I don't
Bama's
know that
out.
Bama gets.
Bama's
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. I think what impressed me the most was Hendon Hooker. I maybe didn't have the biggest pulse on his performance prior to this, but seeing him go out there and dominate, and then going back and kind of looking at the last few weeks, like Hendon Hooker has dominated repeatedly. He threw for 300 yards against LSU. He threw for 450 yards against Florida, who's not any bullshit team on defense. He threw for 325 against Pitt. He's having a he's
He's having a
probably
Heisman season. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And having Alabama as that textbook win, five passing touchdowns, 385 yards for Hendon Hooker.
Yeah.
And then you look on the receiving side of the ball, and Jalen Hyatt had an all-star game receiving 5 touchdowns in 6 receptions for 200 yards. I mean, that's maybe you point to the Bama secondary and be like, oh, that they're at fault. But really, like, Tennessee should get a lot of credit for what they've been putting on the field. And I was very impressed. I said last week, I think between Mississippi State and Tennessee, from what I've seen, if you're looking at upsets that aren't Georgia or Bama in the SEC championship game, and I think Tennessee has shown that they very well could be that team.
Yeah. No, Hendon Hooker's a Heisman candidate, and I think something clicked in, I would say, about the second quarter of that Pitt game, because they were down 14-0 quickly
Yep.
to Pitt, and something clicked in without Cedric Tillman. Something really clicked in for that Tennessee offense, and they got them back in the game. They won that game late, and now he's just rolling. And if you would have said in the first quarter of that game that this team is going to go undefeated and beat Bama, I would have shot you, because you're clearly a wizard. So yeah, I mean, he's been incredible. And like I said, credit to Tennessee. Huge win, unbelievable game, such a cool atmosphere. It's why we love college football. Games like that are why we love college football.
Well, another team who did well this past week and probably dominated in a way people didn't think was going to happen, Michigan remains undefeated, having beat Penn State, I would say handedly, right, this past week. Do you think Michigan is better than, like, okay, now's the time to call it. Do you think Ohio State beats Michigan this year?
You said last week that you thought Michigan was the best team
And
in the Big Ten,
I still believe that.
I called you crazy, and now I think I'm not. I'm still not going to say that they're better than Ohio State. I think Ohio State wins at home. I think that Michigan. What was incredibly impressive was how they dominated that game physically, and I think more than anything, Ohio State is not going to let that happen this year.
Okay.
I can't see, like, if you legitimately, this is, people call me nuts, but if that happens again, where Michigan comes out, and this time in Columbus, if Michigan comes out and dominates running the football the way they did last year against Ohio State again, you have to think about firing Ryan Day, because
born on third base.
You are allowing them ground in the rivalry in recruiting that you just can't. That was the only hope, was their ability to win this way and beat you twice, and now have people think that maybe Ohio State isn't who we thought they were. So I think, that sounds crazy right now, but if it happens again, I wouldn't be surprised if there are Ohio State fans that say that. But I don't see that happening. I think Michigan's very good. I think Michigan is an incredible team, but I think Ohio State right now, especially with the way Bama looked, might be the most complete team in the country, and that they can beat you in a low-scoring game. They can beat you in a shootout more reliably than I would say Georgia or Tennessee.
Okay.
Based on the way they've looked.
Okay. I don't hate that take. I still think I don't know. I mean, obviously it's going to come down to who wins that game, because you got to think Clemson. We haven't seen anything from anyone else in the ACC that's going to suggest to us that Clemson doesn't deserve to be in the national title or in the bracket, right? So presumably whoever loses
North
that
Carolina ACC championship game. We're first we're first in the Atlantic right now. I don't want to hear it. Could
Okay.
happen.
Right. All right. They will not make the national title bracket.
No, I'm saying we could beat Clemson. We're not making the national title.
Sure. We'll go with that. Okay. So
No, we can't.
Michigan
We
beats
can't. We cannot. We might cover. We won't.
Michigan. Michigan beats Penn State handedly. I do think Michigan probably a top 3 team. Anyway, not that it matters. They're top 4 right now in the AP poll. So presumably, if the season ended today, they would be in the national title game. Utah, USC, great game. Comes
Sorry,
down
we're
to
in
the
the
wire.
coastal. I knew that. I got that wrong. As soon as I said it, I was
Super
like,
fan.
that was dumb. I have season tickets. Shut up.
All right. You're a student. Doesn't matter. Whatever. Utah beats USC. They don't cover. People thought they were, shouldn't be favorited, but they were. They're 3.5-point favorites. Don't cover, but win the game. So USC's handed their first loss of the year. Utah, I would argue, still alive for a New Year's Six bowl, which I think is like the peak of what they're able to get at this year, given their record of 2 losses already. But Utah's still a very good football team, and I don't know that they inherently exposed anything that USC had. I think a lot of people were saying USC was going to struggle significantly against Utah's defense. I don't know that I saw that, although they did obviously lose. But I'm curious as to your thoughts where you see these two teams falling as the year goes on.
No, I mean USC's still alive for a playoff spot. That's going to come down to whether or not they can beat UCLA and then run the table. I guess we talked about it last week, but Utah had to win that game.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely had to, or the season's a complete failure. They go out and win it in a very tight, close game. I think USC is probably the best version of what we thought they were. I guess is the way that I would put it, because we expected Lincoln Riley with Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison coming in that they would be very good offensively, suspect defensively, probably a year or 2 years away from being a true national title contender. And they've been so impressive on offense that I think people are sort of getting ahead of schedule. But this is, I guess, if you would have said at the beginning of the year, what is Lincoln Riley's best case scenario? This is probably close to it.
Yeah,
So
100%.
So yeah, I've been high on USC just because their offenses look so good. Now, when I say high, I don't mean they're going to win a national title this year. That's crazy, but I still think they're very much in the mix for playoff spot based on that being their only loss. A tough game at Utah, a game that when you look at Utah's year, you knew they were going to get up for that game. So if USC finishes out the season, they're going to have a very compelling argument for the playoff. Now, it may not, that we are starting to see the cards sort of shuffle between the teams we talked about, USC, Michigan, whoever's the third team in the SEC, whatever happens in the Big 12. You're going to have a lot of contenders for that fourth spot. And it's going to get pretty interesting here down the line if any of those stumble.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it'll be fun to kind of see where Utah falls, and I think I don't think USC is by any means. I think it'll be tough for them to make the college football playoffs, but I certainly don't think it's impossible, as long as if you presume that anyone undefeated gets in. But if the chips could fall to where Georgia, Tennessee have one loss, Ohio State has one loss, or Michigan has one loss, and then you're deciding between a bunch of 1-win teams. I don't know that the committee would land with USC coming out on top, but I don't think it's impossible either. So transitioning a little bit, we're talking about all these teams, none of who are in the Big 12 for the most part. Obviously, USC, Pac-12, but so the Big 12, with the exception of maybe TCU running the table, is probably not making the college football playoff based on where teams have fallen in the ranks right now is on the AP poll. But the Big 12 itself has TCU, who's undefeated at 6-0, Kansas State, Texas, Oklahoma State, Kansas, all with 5 wins and either 1 or 2 losses. And then you kind of get to some pretty not terrible teams of Texas Tech, West Virginia, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Iowa State, who are all by their record on pace, with maybe the exception of Iowa State, going 3 wins in a row and then 4 losses as bowl eligible. So I'm curious as like I think the Big 12 it's going to be really really fun, and we've talked about this before, but it's going to be really fun to see where they all fall and where the chips kind of fall. I think either a Texas TCU or a Texas Kansas State, or a TCU Kansas State. I think all those are possibilities for the Big 12 championship game.
There's no championship game anymore.
For the Big 12, when did they?
I don't know. Maybe they reinstated it, but I thought they got rid of it because they kept cannibalizing themselves, and then now it matters to the committee. So in an odd twist.
No, they're still doing it.
Oh no, yeah, you're right because of the Baylor game last year. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. They definitely went away from it for a while.
I thought that was a COVID thing that they only did for a year, or like the game. Anyway, point being,
yeah, my brain's not working tonight.
So yeah, it's because the Yankees lost. So who do you like coming out on top of the Big 12? Because I think I have an answer that people might not like.
You're gonna say Texas, and I don't necessarily disagree.
You are correct, and you are half correct. Yes.
Just because like Oklahoma State came back down to earth after blowing that game, you would say they're probably with one loss. I guess TCU gets there. I think they stumble at least once.
They have to play. Twice. Yeah, I mean they have to play another team.
Well, I mean, they have coming up down the stretch. I think we talked about this last week, but they play Kansas State at home. They go to West Virginia, which won't be a cakewalk. Then they come home to play Texas Tech. Go to Texas, to Baylor, Iowa State. None of those games are gimmies, even for as well as TCU has been playing. So they have 6 games left against all conference opponents. And
5.
I guess the 2 softest ones of those are West Virginia and Iowa State, and they only get one of them at home. And that's Iowa State, the last game of the year.
Yeah.
So you add all that up, and it's not going to be easy for them to go unscathed through this schedule. And then they got to play a championship game against one of these teams they've already beaten. So when you look at all that, there's not I don't see a way that they finish the season undefeated. And then if they go into the Big 12 championship game, I think if Texas makes it there on the other side, I think Texas gets them. So that'll be my prediction. I think Texas wins over TCU.
I think Texas is going to win too, and here's why. It's Texas's 2 losses ostensibly came when Quinn Ewers was injured. You think, first quarter, second series against Alabama, where they lost to Alabama by 1 point, and then the Texas Tech game, which we all know, Texas didn't play their best game. Texas Tech loves getting up for that game, but Texas didn't have Quinn Ewers. And then when Texas does have Quinn Ewers in a relative rivalry game, they smash Oklahoma and beat Iowa State, although I wouldn't say handedly. They only won by 3.
They were down in the fourth quarter in that game.
But they still came back.
One of my only good picks last week, Iowa State, well inside the number there.
True, but Quinn Ewers still had 3 passing touchdowns in that game.
No, I know. I'm not saying because he played bad. It's just Iowa State's going to be a tough team all year. Texas Tech also won that game in overtime. So tough loss for Texas that they definitely win that game without you or with Ewers.
With Ewers. Or you'd at least think, right? So now you're looking at Texas. So big game this week. Texas plays Oklahoma, which we actually Oklahoma State, which we didn't have on our board, which we'll talk about a little later. But then they have Kansas State next week. Or I'm sorry, in 2 weeks. So they got to bye after this week. After Oklahoma State, and then they go to Kansas. They have TCU at home. Then they go to Kansas again.
It's at
Kansas State. At Kansas State, TCU home,
TCU at home,
at Kansas, and then Baylor at home.
Yeah.
So ostensibly, even though Texas has a tough schedule, you could see Texas coming out as a 2-loss team. I mean, they're favored this week against Oklahoma State. I think it's very possible Texas runs the table and gets the championship game, and then who knows that they'll have almost certainly be playing a team that they've beaten at that point. But I think with Quinn Ewers, but I think my point is with Quinn Ewers behind center, I think Texas has a really, really good chance of coming out on top.
Unless something dramatically changes, they'll be favored in every one of those games,
Yes.
and if they finish 10-2 with a Big 12 championship and New Year's Six Bowl, with the amount of young players they have on their roster going forward, that is a great season for Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you look at the way that they played Bama and losing a tough game in overtime without your true star quarterback and knowing that you have them going forward, um, there's a lot of hope for Texas. Now they have to do it, which they haven't been able to do, but if they can, I think they're really starting to build towards they may possibly could sort of maybe be kind of nearly back.
Do we say the B word? We're saying the B word. Okay.
Maybe, like I said, add the every qualifier you
Possible,
could possibly
maybe,
add on.
possible.
But
Okay.
possibly.
Okay. Let's roll into our games. As always, pick the five. I would argue Texas to Oklahoma State should have been on there. We may have fucked that up, but whatever. So here's the five games to watch this week, to include the one that we just mentioned, but we'll not talk about. Syracuse at Clemson. Clemson's minus 13.5. Over unders 49.5. Kickoffs at noon. Mike, who do you like for this game? If you have a pick, and let's talk about it.
This game is the battle of two teams that I have been completely against.
I've
And
been wrong every time I've picked
yep,
Clemson this year.
I've also been wrong every time I've taken against Syracuse. So that's why I'm playing this game is because one of these teams has to cover, because it's a half point spread, so we can't push. So somebody's got to cover. Um, I hate both of these teams, so I'm more like because they've killed me all year, so I'm more likely to pick with my head. As far as the game goes by itself, this has to be the end of the line for Syracuse's dream season. Um, Garrett Schrader's been playing out of his mind. Sean Tucker's a lot of fun, both on the field and on Twitter, but um, they don't have enough. They can't have enough here to keep this game close to really put up a fight against a Clemson team that seems to have fixed their offense, and that's like the biggest like commendation I can give for Clemson this year, a team that I really didn't. And I've been very hard on DJ, as I admitted. Um, he's been good. Their offense has been good. Their defense, if anything, has been the surprisingly like disappointing part from what we thought they could be. Um, so I think Clemson's the much better team here and will win this game, especially at home. Now, spread wise, I think this screams Syracuse goes in and makes this a game, knowing that this is their season, and the public seems to think that too. So with that being said, I'll get to it on my card, but I'm completely fading myself here, and Vegas agrees with me because public is 60% on Syracuse with the cash 74% on Clemson. So Vegas sees this as a rat line. Take Clemson minus 13.5, so I'm going to take Clemson minus 13.5.
I don't hate that. I'd probably lean Clemson minus 13.5. I mean, Clemson, every time they go into one of these ranked matchups that you think like, oh, maybe Clemson will have a hard time covering. I don't think they've had a hard time covering at all this year, if memory serves. I am taking a look at this line. I actually like the under 49.5 a little more. Syracuse hasn't played good defenses, and Clemson maybe has figured out their offense, but I don't know that they've figured it out enough. Like Syracuse doesn't, their defense isn't terrible, and I think they'll give Clemson a run for their money in that regard. So and I hate that I'm saying this in a college football game, but under 49.5 in a noon kickoff, early morning, wake up, that whole shebang. I think I'm gonna go with under 49.5. I think Clemson's defense could really probably hold Syracuse's offense, and I think if Clemson isn't able to get up and immediately put on an expose of offense, I think you can see this under hit pretty easily.
I don't hate it. My only concern would be Syracuse hasn't played a lot of good defenses, but they score a pretty high floor of points. And so if Clemson shows up at all offensively, you could end up with like a 30-14 score where it's not really close, but Syracuse sort of keep scoring enough to get them to the number. So that's my only concern there. I don't particularly hate the under there. Vegas also agrees with you. 71% of the cash on the under. So um, not a bad pick, I would say. I'm not going to add it, but I see the logic.
I like what you did there. You were like, I could see this game ending 30-14. We'll work on addition later, Michael. So yeah, under 49.5.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking 54. Yeah. Whoops.
It's
I
a
told you,
classic.
brain not working tonight.
Okay,
I was thinking,
UCLA.
sorry, I was thinking like 40-14. Yeah.
UCLA at Oregon is our next game. Oregon's -6, over under
Wow.
71.5, 3:30 kick. Uh, these are two teams that I don't believe in. But I'm curious as to your thoughts first. I want to hear what you have to say. Do you think either of these teams are like over the top good, or have they just been playing
I think UCLA might be, but I'm also waiting for the
Pac-12
fuse to go
football?
out on the firecracker. So I
Here's who UCLA has played, and you tell me, with the exception of Utah,
no, I know. We did this last week. They
yeah,
haven't beaten anybody measurably that good.
except for Utah, which I
Except for
don't think they
Utah,
should have won.
which was a
I'm not
very
trying to take
impressive
away from them.
win. Yeah. Um, I yeah, I think Oregon like it just everything with Oregon depends on how well Bo Nix plays. If he plays well within the offense, they're very good. And because their defense seems to have figured it out a bit. Um, UCLA, it feels like you just get the sense because of who they are, and it's UCLA, and they're not a football school. You just feel like they're going to walk into one game where DTR just looks like one of the NBA players from Space Jam, where he doesn't have his powers, and they just absolutely lay an egg. And I don't know when it's going to be. This is a good spot for it. And I think they're riding a lot of public sentiment. So I am also in on this game. I like Oregon -6.5 because this just seems like a layup. UCLA is higher ranked. I know it's on the road. It's at Oregon, tough place to play, but UCLA has played out of their minds. They played phenomenal. They've been the way better team. So everything says there's no reason why this shouldn't be a field goal line. So rat line, take Oregon -6.5.
I mean, it's
Um,
beautiful logic.
that's the plan here. I just don't understand why UCLA this shouldn't be a much closer spread. So something tells me this is the game where UCLA just comes out and lays an egg, and Oregon wins this game by 2 scores.
I don't. I don't hate that. I have a pick here that I actually really like. I think Oregon's offense, with the exception of Georgia, has been pretty explosive. They have put up incredible numbers on offense. So I see the team total for Oregon at 38.5. I'm going to take the over 38.5. I know that's not a traditional pick. I don't necessarily love -6 because I could absolutely see this being a field goal game. I also don't love 71.5 as an over under. I think both these teams could probably score. They're probably lacking on defense. And I think we've seen that throughout the year where, Oregon's closest game aside from getting blown out by Georgia was playing Washington State, and they scored over 40 points and they gave up over 40 points. So I could see Oregon coming out in basically every scenario and coming out with points. Whereas I don't know that if UCLA doesn't get off the mat, I don't like this over. If they do, then the over will hit. But I think Oregon scores a shit ton of points either way. So I'm going over 38.5 for that game. Moving on. Ole Miss at LSU. LSU's -1.5 and a 3:30 kick at home. Over under 68. I I really wrote off LSU. I don't know about you at the beginning of the year, and I think I might have been wrong. And I'm curious as to whether you agree with that statement.
I don't think we can go there yet just because they beat Florida, whom I think is sort of regressing to where we thought they would be.
That's fair.
Coming off like we always knew Anthony Richardson was talented, but um, I didn't think Florida was that good of a team, and that's the lingering effect of Dan Mullen just completely giving up on being a recruiter. So, that being said, they're generating momentum. I think Billy Napier is getting them going in the right direction. Especially, he knows that what he does in the field this season almost doesn't matter as long as he starts winning on the recruiting trail, and he's doing that. Um, so I think Florida's a bit unfocused, and I'm not exactly surprised LSU won that game. I had them as a Mayad -2.5. Didn't end up taking it, but the over hit, I believe. Maybe not. Anyway, um, the so I don't know that I necessarily buy LSU really being that good, especially like Tennessee made them look silly, but Tennessee also now we know is
A
very
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 good
good.
football team.
Um, but I still think there's just a little bit of bipolarity going on with the SEC West, where everybody is sort of like helter skelter, two faced sort of teams.
That's fair.
Um, and I think that this line only makes sense when you factor in the fact that LSU looked pretty good at Florida, and I think people just see Florida's jersey and still think that they're better than they probably are. So um, I like Ole Miss here. Again, I go back to this is a day game. We've talked about the day game energy at LSU is just not the same.
Yep.
Backing it, or I guess it's a 2:30 kick, so it's much earlier in the day, but still, or sorry, much later in the day than the Tennessee game. But I still think day game at LSU, it's just not the same feel. And I think Ole Miss is better than I think most people probably realize, just based on the way they've been playing. They played, Kentucky was a game they probably should have lost, but um, I think they're pretty good, and I think they're going to beat LSU. I'm not going to take a money line. I'm going to take the 2 points. But I think this will be a close game, but I do think Ole Miss wins. So I'm going to take them with the points +2.
Okay. Um, I'm gonna again. This is gonna be weird. I'm gonna go under 68. Um, I these LSU has a good defense. Ole Miss has a good defense.
I think
They've
this will be
had
a real high scoring 9-7 affair.
I do see this like not broaching 50 plus points. I don't know. This just
Yeah,
doesn't seem to me like a blowout in either way, and it doesn't seem to me like either of these teams are going to score over 34 points. Um, so I think the under hits in this one. I don't hate LSU in this position. I kind of lean them. I think Chip Kelly might have gotten over the hump a little bit on some of these things. And I think Mississippi hasn't really played anybody aside from maybe Kentucky, where they struggled this year, because you got to consider Auburn. God love them, not that great. And they have really the brutalest part of their schedule. I don't even know if that's a word, but the most brutal part of their schedule coming up. Playing LSU this week, then going to A&M next week. Then they got a bye week. Then they have Alabama at home before finishing up with Arkansas in the Egg Bowl. So I think not that they're in a look ahead spot by any means, but I think they will struggle in this game. All right. Moving on. Mississippi State at Alabama. Bama's -21. Over under 61. Kick is at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll go first. I really don't have a lean even in this one. I may be a lean Alabama just coming off a loss. But Bama's look like they've had issues this year. And Mississippi State, high 25 rank. I thought at first maybe they'd get it together and they would come out on top. But I don't know that they have all the components they need to be successful in this game. What about you?
no, I don't think so. But I don't hate Mississippi State with the points here, just
Yeah,
because I think Mississippi State's a pretty good team. A tough game against Kentucky for them last week.
yeah,
But
100%.
um,
And I think that's what threw me off because originally I'm thinking, okay, maybe they can kind of roll over Kentucky and then Alabama's the next big game, but you know, a loss to LSU in early in the season and now Kentucky, and they are not in contention for the SEC or the college football playoffs. I would say.
Yeah, I sort of almost like them in this spot. I think because of that sort of they get up for games where they're you know underdogs, but they haven't handled being favored well. So
Yeah,
in that, and they don't play back to back bad games. So I sort of like them in the sense of I think that this could be a game where Alabama clearly looks like the better team. It's never really close, but Mississippi State keeps it within earshot, and they win, or Alabama wins by 2 scores, but they cover.
that's
So
fair.
that it feels like that sort of game. Like Alabama does enough to say, okay, they figured some things out. They look okay, but Mississippi State keeps this within the number, like a 40, let's say like a 41-28 sort of game, 41-27, game where Alabama clearly shows they're good, but Mississippi State just keeps it inside the number and makes it, more competitive than probably the scoreline more competitive than the game suggests.
I don't hate that. I probably lean the over here. I know I've been picking a lot of unders. I lean the over here a little bit. I figure like Bama at home in a 7 p.m. kick, that place is going to be hopefully for Bama fired up after that loss to Tennessee. So I
And
think
they're always, you know,
yeah, I think I mean look, I think Bama. If you take the team total Bama over, that's probably a pretty good bet. But yeah, I don't really have a pick for this one. I lean the over. Um, good luck, Mississippi State.
yeah.
Okay, finishing up last game of the slate that we want to talk about. Kansas State at TCU. TCU's minus 3.5. Over under 54.5. This is a great matchup at 8 p.m. Eastern. You want to go first? I want you to go
Yeah,
first.
I was
You
going to
go
say,
first.
I think this is maybe the most interesting matchup of the weekend because it's
I
two
do too.
very styles make fights, right? And this is a very different game stylistically because TCU is an offense that has aired it out. They score a lot of points. They're a fun, exciting team. Kansas State probably more just because of the uniforms than actually the way that they play, but they play a boring brand of football. They run the ball well with Deuce Vaughn. They have a good offensive line. They play good defense. You expect them to play a knockdown, drag out, physical sort of game.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that in mind, I think this will be a very different test for TCU, based on the teams that they've played. Not Kansas. Kansas has shown the ability to win games in different ways, but they are not. I think they're just devoid of a little bit of talent to really stay close with everybody throughout the season. And then Oklahoma just got bullied by TCU. So I think
Especially at the end of that game. Yeah.
yeah, so that's not going to happen here. There, Kansas State has been playing with too much, physicality and energy. I like Kansas State in this spot. I think TCU has been really riding an unexpected wave of success, and the walls have to fall down eventually. This is the kind of team that could throw them just the right sort of change up that they really struggle in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe that makes me a TCU hater because I haven't believed in them all year. And we talked about it earlier. I still don't believe in them to make a legitimate run at a Big 12. Not necessarily. They'll be in contention for the Big 12 championship, obviously, but a New Year's Six bowl and playoff spot. I just don't see that. As a legitimate contender. So I really like Kansas State here. They're on my card at plus 3.5. I think if they don't win this game, it'll be a very close game, and TCU will have to show a real championship attitude to beat this team, even at home. I really like Kansas State.
I don't hate that. I'm going with the over here, 54.5. I just think these two teams are going to be able to score points on each other. I don't see a win in TCU's vernacular here that doesn't involve them holding a team to under 20 points, unless you count Colorado at the beginning of the year, whose coach has since been fired. They go in shootouts basically every week. They did it to Kansas. They did it to Oklahoma a little bit. Definitely did it against Oak State and SMU. This seems like a team to me that that is insistent on going for a 30, 40-point shootout. So 54.5, I think Kansas can keep it close. I don't hate the pick on plus 3.5. Might even sprinkle money line here personally just to see how that shakes out. Excuse me. But I like the over 54.5 here. Nighttime game, everybody's going to be rooting for points, so not be a square and bet the under.
Should be a really fun game.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that game. All right, let's roll into our cards. I went 5-4 last week, plus 1.5 units. Almost, actually, sorry, plus 2 units because I had the Tennessee money line pick. Do you want to go first on your card, or do you want to go second?
I can go first.
All
3
right,
and
go
9
first.
last week, so not fun. The Devin Leary. By the way, them announcing Devin Leary out for the season on Saturday may have been a thing we just missed, but what a skull crusher that was to start the
I put
year.
my bet. Yeah, I put my bet in before that got announced, so that really hurt.
Yeah, that sucked. That changed the whole perspective on that
Oh
game,
yeah,
and then Oklahoma State just pissed away that game, and they should have won that. So I'm gonna say that my 3 and 9 result last week was because of those two things.
it's under
And
protest.
yes, yeah, because if I win those two games, if I don't bet NC State at all, and if um and if Oklahoma State holds on, instead of 3 and 9, we would have been 5 and 5. So, uh, yeah, that's BS. When I say bet, I mean bet legally in Virginia. Obviously, as I say every week, don't illegally bet because it'll get you in trouble. All right, talked about Clemson minus 13.5, Ole Miss +2, Oregon -6, and Kansas State +3.5. Only two other plays this week. I like Miami -9 at home against Duke. As I said earlier, fading myself here. There's no reason why Duke should be a 9-point underdog in this game. Duke's fairly good. Miami has not looked good at all. They struggled to beat Virginia Tech. They were up the whole game and let them back in late. And ended up winning by 6. And Virginia Tech's not really good at all. So Miami shouldn't be a 9-point favorite in this game. Total rat line, take Miami -9. And then same thing here. Wisconsin -2.5 against Purdue. Purdue going to Wisconsin. Wisconsin just lost to Michigan State, who has had a terrible season. Wisconsin fired their coach already. They have an interim. They're in disarray for Wisconsin. Everybody in the Big Ten West who normally gets their ass kicked by Wisconsin is looking for a bite at the apple. There should be no reason why Wisconsin should be favored by 2.5 against a Purdue team that's fairly good and gave Syracuse its toughest test of the season. So that being said, I'm taking Wisconsin -2.5. I don't know why they're in this spot, so give me Wisconsin to win by a field goal.
Okay. Talked about Oregon team total over 38.5, Syracuse Clemson under 49.5, TCU Kansas State over 54.5, and Ole Miss LSU under 68. I also like the following: Houston -3 at Navy. Navy's not good this year. The only close game they played where they showed some life was against Air Force, which you kind of expect. Houston's at Navy. Typically, they've done very well. Dana gets up and plays very well against conference opponents, although not as much this year, but I still think Houston, a good football team that's probably lost some because they let a few get away from themselves and didn't finish up the game. So Houston -3 is the pick there for me. Texas Tech -6.5 against West Virginia. Texas Tech's been kind of sneaky good. They can put up some points. West Virginia looks shaky at best this year. So that kind of stood out to me. I think Texas Tech probably puts up an additional. I could see them coming out with a 10 to 14-point win there. Tulane -7 versus Memphis. Tulane's now ranked for the first time since '98. Shout out my boys. They're also covering spreads like crazy, with the exception of the one that they lost. They are now 6-1, and Memphis has kind of regressed a little bit the past couple of years. So I think Tulane's able to air it out. I also probably will take the over in this game. Tulane has been scoring a lot lately. So they've been one of those under the radar teams that now, because they're ranked, people will start paying attention to a little more. I like Wisco -2.5. I think they're better than Purdue. I think they will probably get up for this interim coach, although they had a shit week last week. But I kind of disagree with your analysis. I actually see Wisco coming out on top here, especially at home. Those fans always get up for those games. BYU -7 at Liberty. Liberty's getting some votes for top 25, so that means to me it's time for them to regress because I just don't see them being a top 25 team. BYU obviously looked good earlier in the year. Certainly have regressed this year compared to last, but I don't hate it. Minnesota +4 at Penn State. I think Minnesota should be ranked. We talked about them earlier in the year. They're one of the teams that lost a soul-crushing game and then as a favorite and then dropped out of the AP poll and haven't come back yet. I think this is the week they come back by beating Penn State. Finally, Texas A&M -3 at South Carolina. I'm taking A&M -3. I think they're just the better team. I know they're away, but I think if A&M's going to salvage a little bit better than a nothing to show for a year, this is where they kind of can start on the road to get right to face an Alabama later in the year. So that's my picks. Mike, anything to add?
I'm adding Tulane -7. I believe in your team. I think they beat Memphis, so I have 7 plays this week. But no, other than that, I have a wedding on Saturday to go to, which is terrible that it's in college football season. But this feels like a good weekend to miss. Definitely would have sucked to miss last weekend. So.
Well, I will not be missing it, but look forward to seeing you all. Like and subscribe, follow us, and stay tuned and watch our NFL talk. We do 1 episode a week, 1 for college football, 1 for NFL, and we'll see you next time.